I am here with Mandy Brazeau, who is a mentor coach with the Mind Rebel Academy, and we are here to talk to you about this next coaching skill, which is all about co-creating next best steps. So again, I just want to walk you through where this belongs in the arc of the coaching conversation. So we start the arc of the coaching conversation with the sandbox, creating that topic and that measure of success. What does the client want to talk about and where do they want to end? So that creates the beginning and the end of the arc. Once we've got the sandbox, then we transition into the meat, the heart of the conversation, that explore section of the arc of the coaching conversation. And we've talked about two skills that you can use in that to support you in that exploration. So the first is really remain client centered, right? So allowing the client to lead the way at every step of the coaching conversation. And the second skill is asking honest, powerful questions. So questions that cannot be answered with yes or no. And so that really what that does is it creates the exploration inside of the client so that they can sift through their old ways of thinking and access new ways of thinking, new perspectives, new awarenesses. And once that new awareness or that new learning or that aha or that insight has been kind of birthed, through the client, and they have this truth or this new way of looking at a situation, new way of looking at the problem, then that is the point of the conversation when you can begin to transition into the final stage of the arc of the coaching conversation, which is about creating next best steps. And next best steps are really helping the client to say, okay, I've got this new nugget of awareness. I've got this new perspective. Now, what do I want to do with it? So co-creating next best steps. Again, the client is in charge. So this is not about the coach assigning next best steps and saying, you need to do this, this, and this to get you from point A to point B. This is about continuing to remain curious, continuing to anchor into that coaching mindset and asking your client, what do you want to do with this new awareness? How do you want to integrate this in your life? How do you want to move forward from here? And then you move into actually helping them to craft and create 1 to 3 next best steps. And I always say no more than 3 because more than 3 can get really, really overwhelming.
Definitely.
So really helping the client to just choose 1 to 3 next best steps. So that's where it belongs in the arc of the coaching conversation. So Mandy, I'd love to get a little bit about your perspective of why, sometimes there's a tendency, especially when we're training new coaches, there can be a tendency for the coach to hear the topic, hear the problem, and then jump into creating solutions, right? And so just based on your experience as being a mentor coach, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Again, it's that natural tendency we have when we haven't honed in on this skill to want to be inside of solution mode and fixing it. And as the person in front of you or the client starts speaking, if your brain starts going, you're like, okay, I have something for that. Oh, I know. We've got something there too.
Have you read this book?
Have you
tried this practice? Or have a, right?
Can I tell you about this resource or that? And you might start off like, being in that headspace where you're like, okay, I'm not going to give solutions, but then like your system can kind of start getting built up, especially as they start talking even more about their problems. And then if you get triggered to like have like a me too moment where you're like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you should do here, you may tend to naturally start offering things a little bit sooner than would be in the best interest of your client. So from my perspective and what I've spoken to with the coaches and with anyone else that I speak to actually, is that you really want to wait till that awareness comes from the client, from the person that you're speaking to, that new thought or a new way of thinking comes to them in their way. So then that way they become wide open to solutions that exist within them. if you do it too soon, you miss the opportunity for them to come to their awareness. And it's almost, you can almost, and we call it catching awareness. Sometimes, remember, in coach training, we call it catching awareness or capturing awareness, because there is a moment after a client has been so held and honored, when they actually get a chance to come to that awareness, you can see it.
You can feel it.
You can feel it. It's like, it's so clear that their body language changes. Sometimes it's as clear as being like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of it like that before. Or sometimes it's just like a sigh,
Yeah.
because they've just uncovered something that they didn't know before about themselves, or that they did, but they needed to sift through.
And there's actually chemically something that happens inside of your body when you come to a new solution, or a new perspective, or the answer to a problem that you've been wrestling inside of your mind. Once that awareness is made, a whole bunch of feel-good hormones are released in your body, and you actually get an endorphin rush.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why we want our clients to get those solutions for themselves, because we don't want to steal the endorphin rush from our clients.
That's exactly
when we're
it.
solutioning for our clients, we're getting all the feel-good hormones, and
Yep.
we're like, they're not.
Yeah.
Right? So we really want to create that space for them to come to their own solutions.
Exactly.
Okay, so you just made me think of something. So Albert Einstein has this beautiful quote that says, "We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them." So this is what what a genius.
Such genius.
Such a
that
genius.
Albert. Sorry.
But this is what he was talking about here.
Yeah.
He was talking about, and this is what that explore section of the arc, this is why it's so important, because this is the sifting through.
Yeah.
This is as a client, I'm coming in with a topic, I'm coming in with a problem, and I see the world through this very limited lens right now. And when there's space held to sift that through and feel it through and break it down and access new ways of thinking, then from that moment of awareness, that clarity, then next best steps can be created. There's a real danger
Yeah.
in creating action plans for ourselves from this limited,
Completely.
it's just like the patterns continue.
Yes.
The loops and the loops. You want to break the loop? Change the way you think.
Yes.
Change the way you're seeing the problem. Change your perspective. Mandy, I know as we were preparing for this session, you were talking about a coaching session you recently had where you could have gone one way, but a coaching session and space held for you had you go in a completely different direction. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can just speak to the fact that what ended up happening was I was like set. I knew like I knew, like I thought I knew the direction I needed to head, until I had this space held for me, and I listened deeply and heard what I needed to hear in order to access a different thought. And it's a thought that was not occurring to me. And as somebody who really spends a lot of time, practicing trusting myself, and I was very shocked whenever I had this like, oh, I could think something else about this. I don't have to think the way I've been thinking, which has been sending me into an absolute tail, like a spiral of negative thoughts. And it had to do with, a conversation around enoughness. And for me in particular, it was around enough space in my home. And I believed that, there was not enough space, and therefore I needed to move. And I was like, I believed I had looked at and uncovered every possible stone. That's what the story I was telling myself. But inside of listening to this conversation and in being present and having this space held, I was awakened to a different thought that never, suppose it did occur to me, but I didn't allow it. I didn't allow it in. I didn't allow it to seep into me. And so inside of that inquiry, I was able to go deeper and say, well, what if? What's possible if I think something different than what I have been thinking? And again, it sounds very simple, but when you're in deep and you're inside of a thought process, that having somebody else hold that for you is so powerful for you to explore something else, for you to explore another step that never occurred to you before, and ask the questions like, okay, well, what about this? And how about that? And what happens there? And what supports do you need? And that sort of thing.
Or even like, what is it that you actually yearn for?
Yes. Yes.
Right? Like I need a new house. I need a bigger space. Like, what is it that you're actually yearning for?
That's it. And
right?
that's what came through for me, was that I realized it was not about the house and the space. It was about, in particular, it was about having some like specific a little bit of space for my children to have their own space. And there's a million reasons why that's important to me. But what I realized was I don't need much more space. I just need a little bit more. And it was just in that opening up of like, it wasn't all or nothing. It was just a little bit more, just a little bit more. That changed everything. My whole system just like,
you always know when you've anchored into a new awareness and like the right next steps in front of you, when your body's like,
oh, thank you.
Thank you. That feels right. It might feel hard.
Oh, yeah.
In some circumstances. Yeah. Sometimes I say, like, sometimes your next best step will both simultaneously terrify your mind and stir your soul.
Yeah.
But it will still feel so right in your place of knowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Mandy, I'm hearing you say that pre-coaching session, you were probably going off on one direction of next best steps of maybe looking at realtor.ca and looking at all the homes and looking at
exactly what I was doing.
Market that is today and all the things. And then after having this awareness of like what it is that you truly yearn for, where did that set you off? What were your next best steps after that?
Well, because I had this like opening, it allowed me to like remember things that were blocked. And I was like, oh, we have this like perfectly drawn out renovation that's been on ice for 3 years now. What if we did that? What if we just put a little, and it's not big, it's just enough. What if we just put a little renovation on our house? And then again, I'm like, my husband is a licensed carpenter with 25 years of building experience. So it's like, he can do that. You know what I mean? And it was like, oh my gosh. I just remember like, as I was thinking these things through, I was like, oh my gosh, like why didn't I just step out of it? Why didn't I just step back? But I had to go through the process and I had to have that conversation in order to know like these are the things. And I think as much as I have some next best steps, like some really concrete next best steps of like how we're going to move towards that addition, I really feel like I'm expanded now to not look at this in such a tight way. And so I'm now looking like I have a lot more like about other things. And I'm using this release and reminder to look at other areas of my life of where I can tend to get a little too tight in my thought process and where I can grip a little too.
That's beautiful.
Too tight. So it wasn't just about
the
addition or the space. It was about more than that, which is kind of special about next best steps because it can take you further than just what's right in front of you.
So there it is. You see in practice how that set Mandy in a completely different direction. And that is the power of a coaching session. That's the power of having a thinking partner with you to help you sift through that and help you to claim and declare what your next best steps are in alignment with what you truly yearn for, what you truly desire.
Yeah.
So I want to invite you into your own next best step inquiry. So thinking about the topic that you have been personally, well, really self-coaching yourself on and sifting through. Think about just even reflecting on the process that Mandy just went through and thinking about what is it that what is the truth for you? What is that awareness for you as you've been using some of these skills to really unpack your topic? What is at the heart? What is that piece of awareness that is becoming clearer for you now? And what's next? What do you want to do about that? How do you want to integrate that into your life? What are your 1 to 3 next best steps? Write those down. And perhaps even ask yourself then a follow-up question, which is, and how do you want to keep that promise to yourself?
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inside our next session, our very last training video of this series, we're going to be talking about how to have a reflective coaching practice. Stay tuned.